Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Chair's schedule, I'm just reading out from this is Constitution and Governance Committee meeting of the 3rd of July. And I'm introducing myself. My name is Councillor Ross Henley, and I'm the chair of this committee. I'm welcoming everybody, including the members of the public, if there are any. And today's meeting will be run using the webcasting system via Microsoft Teams. Committee members and key officers are physically present in the council chamber. Well, it's not the council chamber, it's the Luttrell Room at Somerset County Hall in the centre of Taunton. Other elected members of the public and officers may physically or remotely join the meeting to speak on specific agenda items or just even observe these proceedings. The meeting is being webcast and everybody can join in, and members of the public they can observe remotely. The agenda pack is available via ModGov and directly from the council website from the link which was sent out to members. Members of the public can find it directly from the council website. When you're invited to speak, could you please speak clearly into the microphone and state who you are? That's clearly for the benefit of people who may be joining this meeting, members, for instance, who joined us online, or more importantly, members of the public who might have joined us online who don't know who we are. So it's really important we identify ourselves. And the meeting is also being audio recorded as well. And finally, as agendas are being viewed electronically, could I kindly request that members and officers refer to page numbers from the published agenda pack to assist all present in finding the appropriate information. Item number 1 today is apologies for absence. I have apologies from Councillor Butt Philip, and he's substituted by Councillor Richard Wilkins. Welcome, Richard. Councillor Barry Clark is not able to join us in person, but I think he wants to join. He's joining us online. He's there. Barry's there. Councillor Curley has escaped from his meeting about the non-existent Somerton post office at the moment, and he's joining us online. I knew he wouldn't get it for 2 o'clock. Tim, as Vice Chairman, you're most welcome. And Helen Kay is joining us online as well. Hi, Helen. Any other apologies, Pippa? Okay. Item number 2 then is the minutes of the previous meeting, which took place on the 9th of May, pages 9 to 14, 9th of May 2025. Any questions or queries, or can we treat those as a true record of what took place at that meeting that day? Do I have a proposer?
Can I speak, please?
Oh, yes, of course. Sorry, I didn't see you. Yeah. Hi, Alan.
Hello there. I'm sorry, it's Helen Kay here, Councillor for Frome East, and I'm sorry I can't be there today. I sent you an email about 20 minutes ago. You may not have seen it yet. I don't know if this is the right place to bring it up, but I wanted to ask about the terms of reference, the planning terms of reference, and the fact that the working group are not going ahead with that. Should I say it now under the minutes, or do you want me to raise it as a separate issue under any other business?
Have you raised it at the end of the meeting, yeah, under the Constitution Work Programme? Is that okay?
Oh, I think I've got an echo. Fine, I'll raise it then. It's an issue about well, it's a constitutional issue actually, so I'll wait for it then. Thank you.
Declaration. Can we treat the minutes of the true record of which took place on the 9th of May? All those in favour? Any against? That is carried. Item number 3, apart from the published declarations of interest, are there any other declarations of interest which any member wishes to share with us? It's on page 15 and 16 of the agenda. Councillor Hugh Davis.
Thank you, Chair. I'm on licensing committee, member of licensing committee. Okay, because we'll be debating that, yeah.
Declarations of interest, Barry.
I'm chair of licensing. No. I ought to say, Ross, that I'm chair of licensing committee.
Get the right one to start. Chairman, I think it's on sort of somewhere on this paperwork where I'm a member of Ilminster Town Council, but I seem to have been excluded for some strange reason. That one seems to have got missed somewhere. I think I did raise it previously at another meeting, so I thought that had been dealt with. So I'm just raising it just to be clear and avoid any doubt.
Declarations of interest. And we move on then to item number 4 is public question time. We have no formal notice, Pippa says, of any public questions. Nobody wishes apparently to take any late or urgent questions to this meeting, so move swiftly on to the first main item on the agenda, which is item 5, licensing subcommittee hearings. Welcome, John Rendell, licensing manager, who's here to talk to us, introduce this report, which is in the agenda pack, pages 17 to 32.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Licensing subcommittee hearings are a statutory requirement for the licensing regime which controls gambling and the licensing regime for alcohol, entertainment and late night refreshment. As I've explained in my report, a High Court ruling has clarified that the wording of the regulations associated with those two licensing regimes provides for hearings to be held fully online. As things stand, our hearings tend to be hybrid, with the aim of continuing to harness the benefits of face-to-face meetings, but with some added flexibility, which can only be achieved if people are able to attend online. Together with officers from legal and democratic and licensing functions, we've come up with a proposal to go a step further and shift our preference, if you will, to these hearings being online in order to minimise our environmental impact and reduce financial cost. We recognise that we'd run into some issues if all hearings were held online and that this could prevent people from engaging in licensing. So this is why in our proposed terms of reference that are one of the appendices with the report, we use the term preference. So the way that we see this working in practice is that when we would give a person notice that they are able to attend a licensing hearing, we would say that the meeting is online, but that we are prepared to revert to hybrid if there is a need. Now, in paragraph 1.6 of the proposed new terms of reference for the licensing subcommittee, so that's appendix 1 of the report, we've given some examples of when we think hybrid meetings would occur. So things like when there's a lot of public interest and objections to a license application. The Licensing Regulatory Committee have already discussed the proposals, and their comments and recommendations are included in my report at paragraph 17. I would just make my own comment in relation to their recommendation, which is to have the chair and vice chair of the committee decide the final format of a hearing in each case. And I would just say that I personally don't think this would be necessary unless there were responses to our notices of hearing from parties suggesting that they weren't happy with it being held online. I think if we decide in each case, then we may end up with a meeting or a conversation without there being a real need. But other than that, I think the committee was broadly in support of the proposals. So that's all I sort of intended to say on that. But obviously, I'm happy to take any questions.
John, I obviously wasn't there, I wasn't party to those discussions, and I'm broadly supportive of what you're saying. Just going to ask an ignorant question, which other people who've not been involved in the process might be thinking. Where does this sit then with the legislation in terms of decision-making processes about members normally having to be in a physical room to... I know there is government consultation at the moment where that may well change, and the government's proposals are that they are talking about potentially allowing remote online voting. Is this decision being taken in anticipation of this changes?
Oh, so this is separate from that. So the reason being, I've mentioned it in my report. It comes down to there being specific regulations for the licensing of gambling and specific regulations for alcohol, late night refreshment and music, which make reference to a hearing and make reference to a place, but those regulations do not define what those are. So that was what was challenged in the court, and the court has said because those terms are not defined, it is lawful for a licensing authority to have some or all of that hearing remotely online. So it's separate. You know, there was emergency legislation during the COVID pandemic to allow councils to have meetings online. Naturally, licensing hearings moved online as well, but it drew attention to the specific regulations. And after the end of the pandemic, many councils continued to have meetings that were partly or fully online, having taken advice, and there being a lot of legal discussion and it being discussed that those words weren't defined. It was challenged. The High Court have ruled that it's perfectly lawful to do that. I don't know if Leslie wants to add any more to that.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The fact that the Licensing Act and the Gambling Act are much newer pieces of legislation than, say, for example, the Local Government Act 1972, Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act, etc. The wording, I think, is more up to date. And certainly the High Court case that John has referred to in his report certainly decided that to have a virtual or online meeting was not unlawful. As you will probably know, there is government consultation out at the moment to determine whether the virtual hearing regime be extended across the remaining local government platform. But I think the differences we have certainly relate to the wording in the two pieces of legislation, and the fact that post COVID we were able to continue with the emergency regime that we operated during that time, but which for other committees came to an end, was terminated.
And John, that gives me some information on that one. Any comments, members? Hugh.
Thank you, Chair. Let me first tell you straight away, I'm totally against what possibly is going to happen. But my reasons are this. At one hearing we had, we were dealing with somebody who didn't come to the actual hearing at our place of it. I won't name it. And they disappeared from time to time when they were giving evidence. And then there was a member of the family which spoke at times. It got very confusing because there was a tie-up between them, not mother and daughter, but in the job that they were doing. So we had that issue there. And then with my own colleagues, when they don't turn up and not at the meeting, they go on the computer and listen in and speak. But are they there all the time? And my answer to you is no. And I feel very uncomfortable that if we stop somebody from doing something and they noticed that our team weren't in situ, they could go to magistrates and perhaps overturn what we're doing. Because when you're not in place on the site, then you should stay by your IT network all the time, unless you give yourself to the chair that you wish to be not available for a few minutes. That's got to be. But so what I'm saying, there's a hole in the whole setup where we could be challenged because we want to save money, etc., for the planet, i.e. But at the end of the day, we could get caught out by some bright lawyer. Thank you, Chair.
Touches the perennial problem, doesn't it, about when we have online meetings? I'm sure it's not like this here. The engagement, particularly when we have cameras off and everything, the engagement of people at those meetings, and are they as concentrating and as focused on the matter in hand as if they're in the room together? I'm sort of playing devil's advocate with this one. John, would you like to respond to the comments made by
Yes, thank you, Chair. Certainly in terms of the subcommittee meetings that I have attended as the legal advisor, where we've had applicants, other parties online, certainly when those online parties go offline, the Democratic Services Officer supporting the meeting is able to see that and can alert the chair immediately that Mr. So-and-so or councillor unfortunately is offline. And so we can pause at that stage to try and find out what the problem is and try and get them back online.
then if there's a specific item, you need to be there for the entirety of the discussion of that item to actually vote on any potential vote on that matter.
Yes, you certainly need to hear all the evidence that is presented in regard to that case. And if you are one of the decision-making members who is working remotely, unless you can assure yourself of that, then you shouldn't be voting.
Probably then for the chair of licensing then, who may be convinced by advice of an officer that somebody has not been present online for whole of that deliberation and the discussion, that they could be potentially ruled out from voting on that item.
Yes, certainly that is the case, Chair. And in that event, because obviously we sit, or members sit as a panel of 3, if it is one of those members who is online and has not been able to follow the entire debate and therefore cannot vote, there brings into question the issue of whether or not the subcommittee is quorate. And that will involve a discussion with the chair.
And as chair of licensing, you want to come in and make a point?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to bring some general context, I suppose. I wasn't at the licensing committee where this was discussed. However, I'm generally in favour of the proposal. There is the ability for myself or my vice chair, Marcus Cravis, Councillor Cravis, to ask for a meeting to be face-to-face if we feel it's of greater public interest, or in some cases it's important to see the person in front of you. For body language almost can say an awful lot in a meeting, especially if you're reviewing a controversial, say, taxi license or something like that. Then we still have that ability to do that. We've held hybrid meetings up to now, where perhaps one member of the subcommittee has been online, but usually there's 2 of us present in the room. But what it will help with is attendance at subcommittees. It hasn't been a big problem. I don't think we've ever had to cancel a subcommittee because of lack of councillors, but the number on the committee is limited to 15 by statute, and therefore we can't have additional members on the committee or subs who are untrained, and there is a limited pool of councillors to attend, and with 4 different venues across the county, you're asking councillors to travel sometimes a considerable amount of distance. Hugh is very good. He will travel from Willerton down to Yeovil over to Shepton because he enjoys attending the committees, and that is really admirable. But it isn't a big ask to ask somebody from near Minehead to come down to Yeovil. So I'm generally in favour, although I think in certain cases we still will have to have face-to-face meetings, but that will be something John Rendell and I can discuss, or Leslie, at the time, if we feel it's going to be of particular public interest, or we really need to see the whites of the eyes of the person who's applying or their licence is under review. Thank you.
Emily.
Thank you. I just wondered, I don't know how the meetings have run up to now. Is there a stipulation that cameras are on? Although I do appreciate very rural connectivity issues, but fundamentally, could there be a stipulation that should it be held, or in part held online, that cameras must remain on? And if they don't, there should be there could be a consideration for drawing the meeting to in person, or having to reconvene at another time. Thank you.
John or Leslie, would you like to pick up that point about specifically around the cameras? Do they have to be on during the discussion on the item? And then we'll go to Stephen Pugsley after that.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, that is certainly something that we've insisted on to date. The specific case that Councillor Davies mentioned, I recall I was there. Actually, the reason that the person attended that hearing online was because they had a very late notice said that they couldn't attend in person, so the rest of us were gathered in the room. They had a family member to care for. There were some issues with the camera functioning, and there was a voice in the background at one point, and the meeting was paused for her to identify who that person was and clarify whether, they were entitled to speak during the meeting, so we were kind of on top of that. But it's certainly within our gift to build something into our procedures to ensure that that's made clear, to ensure that we know that who we've got and that they are participating properly. I don't know if Leslie has anything more to say on that.
Certainly, I think it should be a mandatory position that certainly when you're online and when you're speaking, you're addressing the subcommittee, be you an online councillor or an interested party or another third party, that when you speak, you should put your camera on. Yeah.
Actually, you've got the running order wrong. It's Marcus Kravis, the Vice Chair, he's online, and then Stephen Pugsley, then Martin Whale.
Just to show I'm paying attention. Are you happy coming out the room before the phone? Yeah, I just wanted to say, if you don't mind me is that we discussed this at great length in the licensing meeting, and there were various views. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with what the chair licensing, Councillor Carswell, has had to say. I think one of the issues we do have is that, although they're quite important, some of these meetings you do deciding someone's financial future. But I do also think there's some meetings that we've had which could have been done very easily just online. And there have been cases where lawyers have turned up from London, come to Somerset, ended up probably spending the night in Somerset, then turned up in the morning for a hearing, which we've managed to drag out for 20 minutes. So there are some instances where I don't think you have to be in the room. I think there's always a good judge, there's always a good sense of between the officers, and obviously between the chair licensing and vice chair licensing, how whether a meeting would be needed in person. I would add that I do think it does need member input into that decision. I think that we're not, although the officers might be stacked with work, I think sometimes even a 5-minute phone call to decide on whether a meeting should be in person or not should be required. And I think there are cases where you're just not going to you get the sense where you don't need it. There will be some cases that you do. I also think that's a very valid point about cameras being on, because actually it is a hearing where you're going to decide whether someone's on someone's future, or the future of their business. And I think that asking for cameras to be on in today's world is not a big ask. I recently attended a speed awareness course with just about every other resident of Old Cleve and Blue Anchor online. There weren't many of those online, but one of the stipulations of that speed awareness course was cameras remained on. And interestingly, everybody managed to keep their cameras on. So I just thought I'd throw my 2 pennies worth in. I think that what the Licensing Regulatory Committee said in their meeting should stand. And I'll leave it with the committee because I'm not actually a member of this committee. Thank you, Chair.
Very much, Marcus. Next one is Stephen Pugsley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand entirely the concerns that Councillor Davis has got, but I'm afraid that this is the way that not only licensing, but I'm sure other council, including the quasi-judicial planning, will go sooner or later. So licensing is leading the way. And I think with the qualifications that Councillor Carswell has outlined in terms of there can be a in-person hearing if there is particular interest or the circumstances demand it, that's probably the best safeguard. Casting my mind, however, back to chairing planning committee meetings during COVID, when we were allowed to do such things, although it is absolutely desirable that you have your camera on during any meeting, I think there are circumstances when, in order to maintain connection, some people do need to turn their cameras off in order to maintain the bandwidth. And I just have some concern about absolutely stipulating that you've got to have your camera on, because in some circumstances that could prejudice the connection. And it seems to me that it's easier to monitor the fact that you have stayed connected. You know, if somebody online there disappears, they've lost their connection, they've therefore lost their participation in the meeting. I'm just a bit uncomfortable about absolutely insisting that their cameras have to be on, because in some circumstances that might either not be practicable, feasible, and it would be unfortunate if the system failed because somebody's face disappeared, even though they maintain the connectivity.
A disadvantage on rurality, because it's more likely to happen to somebody in a rural area. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good. Martin Weld.
Thank you. This has been brought about by a stated case, as we've been told and read, and it would appear that the fact we have to have them in person was misinterpreted under the 72 Act, isn't it? But where the council meetings have to be held in person. So this has given, in my mind, the opportunity for this council to do what it says on the report, change the constitution so that the meetings can be held online when it's felt it's proper to. And I think it's a very good idea, and I think we ought to pass it through now. And as the chairman has just said, he, if necessary, they could hold the one in person without any difficulty, because the constitution doesn't say you can't do that. So I'd like to propose we do that, Chairman.
Proposal then from Councillor Whale. Do we have a formal seconder? We won't take the vote yet, of course, because other members want to speak. Do you have a seconder for that? You want to speak, or you're seconding, Dawn? Seconding. Okay, Dawn seconding. Okay. Next speaker then is Tim Curley.
Thank you, Chair. I always worry a bit about virtual meetings. I do think that we make the better quality of decisions when we're in person. But I think, like Councillor Pugsley, I think I take some comfort in the chair's discretion to call it in as an in-person meeting. So, I mean, I personally think there are advantages to virtual meetings, and I think on balance, if the committee are happy with this, I think we should probably go for it. But I do have my reservations. I'm just glad that discretion is there, and I feel it should be used in certain situations, especially complex cases. Thank you, Chair.
Emily Pilston.
Thank you. Going back to the consideration of stipulating cameras on and understanding, rurality and those challenges, could there possibly be a minimum requirement of the applicant and either the chair or the vice chair being a minimum as visually available online for these meetings? I know that sounds a really silly thing, but I just think that if you're not going to have an in-person meeting, and as Tim points out, they are preferable in the first instance, really, that there is at least a minimum requirement of definitely the applicant for an all-time camera, and either the chair, vice chair preferably, to make sure that there's a kind of sense of actually looking at one another, and know that you're looking at one another, and know that you can have this almost virtual in person rather than just a dot on a screen. Thanks.
Very much, Emily. John or Leslie or both, would you like to sort of reply to any of the comments that have been made by the last few speakers? Then we'll come back to you, Hugh. Yeah.
Listening to what Councillor Palstone has said about a minimum requirement for the applicant and possibly the chair or vice chair of the subcommittee to be online all the time, how then we have other persons who have lodged formal representations to the application. They are there if they wish to speak are you going to, why should you not therefore extend that why should you exclude them from that minimum requirement?
I'm not suggesting which people beyond, but in terms of who gets to be permanently visually online, not just there like everybody on our screen here, that would be down to the committee and yourselves really to work out what would be most appropriate.
I think the thing that we have to be aware of here is that hearings are governed by the hearing regulations 2005, and that the principle there is that all hearings are dealt with fairly, so that everybody leaves the meeting feeling that they've had a good crack at putting forward their case. They haven't been prejudiced, and I think if you are going to restrict or if you are going to require in any way, then you have to make sure that is fair to everybody.
This is about cameras on. Yeah, I'm not suggesting restricting. I'm just suggesting a minimum requirement of cameras on for, because of that rurality and risk of connectivity and dropout, that not everybody, for example, can just turn their cameras off.
Just wondering, one of the actual situations in which we envisage that we might revert to hybrid would actually be where someone has expressed a concern because of their internet connection being poor, something like that. So that's something that we could highlight in our notice of hearing and hopefully draw out rather than leave to chance on the day. So I think perhaps hearing what's been said, perhaps it would be fair to insist that as part of our hearing, the cameras must be on. But we can obviously identify the information that we send out. Please be aware that if you believe that you're going to have a connectivity issue, then you will need to request that it is a hybrid meeting, and then obviously in that case, then we can provide to make sure that everyone is either in the room or on screen as well. I just wonder if that maybe kind of achieves both those.
Because now that I've got a couple of speakers, we have Richard Wilkins, who's not spoken before. Then I intend to take Barry Clark, Sue Osborne, and Hugh Davis. Richard.
Just on, I've got 2 points now. Just on the yeah.
You're not on mute again, are you?
Yeah, it is now. Yeah. Could I just recommend that the chair always has a certain amount of discretion, and if there's a dropout for connectivity, I'm sure the chair can pick up the difference between a genuine dropout. Yeah. So I believe that there's a certain amount of chair discretion on that. My second question really, again, is to do with the chairs. I think it's absolutely appropriate that the chair has discretion over whether it's held, whether to actually say no, we won't hold it online, we'll hold it in person. But I just wonder what the mechanism, or is there a mechanism for people to ask for it to be held in person, like the applicant or somebody who feels strongly enough. I like I say, I think it's totally appropriate that the chair has the discretion, but what is the mechanism, and is that publicised or not? The ability to ask.
Can I just please remind members on online, please do keep yourself muted at all times when you're not speaking, because I hate to beat anybody up in particular, but it's really problematic in terms of the meeting and the experience that people attending the meeting as well. So please do put yourself on mute when you're not speaking. Barry Clark's next.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chairman. This is awful sound today, so I don't know if you're going to get this. I'm having difficulty hearing you. Life was very simple when we all had to go to meetings, and if you wanted to speak and you wanted to vote and make a decision, life was very easy. We knew where we were. Now we're talking about mechanisms and bandwidth and discretion. Surely if something is so important that somebody wants to have their point of view made, they should be in the room where the people who make the judgment on them can listen to them and see them and make a decision there and then. I know online meetings save an awful lot of traveling and an awful lot of time, me 2 hours today, but I'm not sure that that's the right way to go to make important decisions. I'm not really in favour of it at all. Thank you, Chair.
Next one is Hugh Davis and Sue Osborne.
Thank you, Chair. Just a little bit more evidence here, Chair, please. We had at a recent hearing, person that had written in challenging what the applicant was applying for. That's fine. But then they came on the screen and the two of them just wouldn't get off the screen. They kept on interrupting all the time. And now, what are we going to do then? Because, you know, if that fellow had lost his applicant because of her interference, you know, we would be picked up for it possibly because we failed to control them.
Like an issue for the chair to exercise discretion and manage that situation, and if needs be to remove their right to speak if they are causing great disturbance. Officers should have been dispensed appropriately. Simon, as a chair of licensing, do you want to come?
Thank you, Ross. I don't think I was at that subcommittee, but you can get the same problem with people face to face, that they won't stop talking. Just a couple of points. We are time limited reconvening subcommittees. The first step with a subcommittee that we hear of is that we're asked if people who can attend, and at that point, knowing roughly what it's going to involve, that's when I could have a discussion with John before actually the meeting date is set in stone. And I could say to him, as to on being visible online, I think the chair and the subcommittee members, having dealt with subcommittees a lot, there's a lot of to and froing with the members of the subcommittee and the applicant and various other parties. I don't feel the need for the applicant and everybody else to be live on camera all the time, because they have their time to speak, and when it is their time, they can have their camera on. Otherwise, yes, if there's enough bandwidth, we can have everybody visible. But I think the only members who need to be visible are perhaps the chair and the subcommittee members, because there is a lot of to and froing, and you don't want to have to keep saying, can you put your camera on, can you put your camera off? But with the applicant and other submissions, such as the police or responsible authorities, we can just put them on when they need to speak.
You, so we've got Sue Osborne, and is anybody else after Sue? Hugh, Sue and Hugh. I think we'll move then to a conclusion.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. I haven't spoken in this debate yet, so I'm probably the very last to go. I don't sit on licensing, and it is a quasi-judicial process. On the whole, where possible, I support the arguments for online. However, I am a very rural councillor and I do not have great broadband, to say the least, and it is not known that even with camera off, you get dropped out of meetings or you get dropped out, so you lose your place in the meeting. If you are a licensing subcommittee member in a rural area and your broadband connection goes down, which they do, where is that going to leave you when you have to come to take a vote? Because if it was something like planning and you've got to be there all the time, you would not be able to vote on that application. And as you're relying on 3 people, so you get a majority decision one way or t'other, and one of you drops out, that could compromise that hearing straight away. And also, don't forget that in Somerset, rurality is a protected characteristic. And if someone felt that they were disadvantaged because the licensing committee subcommittee member dropped out, so it wound up a tie, so it either had to be redone again, or it was a decision that they wanted to query, it could leave you in a bit of a mess as to how you do that. Because I'm really concerned about the rurality, I had a briefing recently with a couple of people from the broadband team, and I was shown a map and it had little bright blue dots on. Those little bright blue dots was where you were not going to get broadband anytime soon. So you weren't going to get Wessex Internet, you weren't necessarily going to get BT. In fact, BT aren't going to be getting anywhere near me for 2 years. And that is my concern, that there is probably still a lot of the county that you might think should be covered because it's near a town that is not, or is woefully inadequately covered. And I can tell you that in Ilminster, we also have black spots as well, even though it's a town. You wouldn't think we would, but we have. So I'm not sure, having listened to all the debate, as to whether you are really ready for going fully online yet. You may have to stick with hybrid for a little bit longer.
I call Dawn next, and then because we'll come back to you because I know you have spoken, but Dawn hasn't spoken yet.
I've listened to the debate. We've had a paper in front of us which is very clear that we're following government guidance by implementing this. There's been some concerns raised. I think if anybody has a hearing, they need to ensure they are in a place and site where they will have good connectivity if that hearing is of great interest to them. So I would hope that people would be wise enough to make those decisions if they were attending a meeting and wanted to participate. So I really don't see there's anything else we need to do than to go to a vote and accept the recommendations the report brings forward.
I have a proposal by Hugh Davis and no, it wasn't Hugh, was there? It was Martin. I nearly absolutely sent Hugh into meltdown there. So I didn't propose this. It's Martin has proposed and Dawn has seconded. I was just confusing myself because Hugh is the next speaker and probably the final speaker on this one, Hugh. We've had a very thorough debate on that one. I understand there are some concerns about rurality and other issues, but as Dawn has said, this is the way the legislation is going. I think we had a year of all online meetings, including council meetings and committee meetings, which the Secretary of State at the time, Robert Jenrick, decided not to extend in May 21, which was highly controversial because we were in a invidious situation where I can remember the very first full council meeting at Dean House, where there was about 60 members in the PCR room, the John Meikle room there, forced into that room together. It felt deeply uncomfortable, at a time when legally you were not allowed to go and sit in a pub inside a public building, but you could sit inside a council meeting together. It was really, really odd and uncomfortable situation. And I think the present government is right to review this legislation, and this is where the legislation is going. They're already consulting, and their draft recommendations are in terms of online voting to be allowed. So this is the way the legislation is going. We sound like we have checks and balances in place in terms of making sure that the key members of the committee and key members of the applicants are in a place where they could be online if they want to, where they can be visible, and and there is a responsibility as well, as Dawn has pointed out, for members if they really desperately want to make sure they're there to locate themselves in a position and place where they are going to have better connectivity. So proposed by Councillor Wells, seconded by Dawn Johnson. The recommendation is that we recommend to full council that the council's constitution depart D4, the Licensing and Regulatory Committee terms of reference be revised as Appendix 1. Revisions set out reflect the council's preferences for online hearings. All those in favour? And against? And Hugh's against, yeah. Okay, thank you. Interesting debate, that one. Item number 6 is the Local Government Boundary Commission for England, LGBCE, Council submission for Phase 2B. We know that the Boundary Commissioners launched their initial findings, I think on the 3rd or 4th of June, just over a month ago. We had an informal meeting online of the committee, whose decision was that they, on balance, did not want to go for the process of setting up a working group, and we did not want to set up a formal council submission to this process. But what we wanted to do was strongly encourage members to engage themselves in this process and to encourage interested parties, political parties, parish councils, community groups to take that part of that process and make their consultations and deliberations and complaints or comments to the Boundary Commission with the proposals. I think we've got a short window here. It's early August. I think that August the 8th sort of rings in, maybe a bit earlier than that. It's the deadline for that. That's the view the online informal committee meeting took place, the 11th of August. Yeah, so you've got another 3 days. So that's where we are. We decided we didn't want to make a formal representation. So we brought it back there for a check and balance this meeting to say our recommendation will be that we're not whether or not to make a further submission to the Boundary Commission, and a submission is made, the scope of the response will alternatively promote awareness of the proposals while recognising parish and town councils. Local councils and political groups are able to make their own submissions based on local knowledge, community interest and identity, which I've just said. We're trying to encourage as many people, a broad number of people, groups and organisations and members of the public and members to make their representations. And we also had quite a strong view as well from that committee that we did not wish to reopen the discussion on multi-member wards. We had quite a long discussion in our working group about this and also at this committee meeting, but it's quite clear that the Boundary Commission have taken a really robust view that they wish to see 96 single-member divisions. I personally think it would be an act of folly would be the wrong word, too strong, but an act of a waste of time for us to revisit that. That's just my own particular position. And I wish to open this up to members. Stephen Pugsley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you summed that up really well. I think, as you say, the Boundary Commission has been so robust in what they have said in their document that the scope really for us reopening it and spending potentially a lot of time and a lot of officer time re-examining various amendments, suggestions, alterations, probably trying to get us back to what we said before, is a hiding to nothing. I think, however, the point you make that now is the time when parishes, individual divisional members, towns, city councils can make robust comments themselves to the Boundary Commission. That is fit and proper, and we should do everything as members that we can to encourage our towns and parishes to do that. And I'm sure we're all in that process at the moment. But any more than that, I think, is just going to be a waste of time and resource. And so if you were moving from the chair, Mr. Chairman, that we should adopt the view that we're not going to make any further council submission, but that we encourage towns and parishes and community groups to make their submissions, then I would happily second your proposal.
Stephen will second it. We'll open up to debate, and I think you're right as well. That not everything in the proposals made forward by the Boundary Commission sits easily with all of us, and I put this frankly, definitely there are one or two proposals I can think of which are a load of old tosh. But I think that's for myself and other local community groups to argue the case cogently and appropriately in community reasons as to why they may wish to revisit their decision of the old load of old tosh. But that's not for us to bring back here and have some endless, long, laborious debate about where, you know, the village of Buggins sits in the Boundary Commission. Okay, any other members wish to speak at the moment? I think we've got Helen Kay and then Tim Curley.
Hello, I don't want to reopen it either, but I just have some technical questions really, and I see that Steve Lake's in the room, I think, and I just wanted to ask if he could perhaps help me with them. One of the things that the discussions that we had is that we were told that when we were looking at the boundaries was that we were using jigsaw pieces based on polling districts, and I noticed that in Frome, what the Boundary Commission have done is said, we're just going to change all this and use more natural features like railway lines and rivers to divide up Frome. We're going to do it a bit differently from what you suggested in your submission. And I'm just not wasn't really clear if they actually were still using polling districts. My second question is that I've looked at the reports and I can see an Excel spreadsheet on the Boundary Commission website that shows what the existing divisions, how they will increase. So, for example, the population for my particular division of Frome East will increase by 24%. And of course, that needs to be looked at. But when I was looking more closely, it looked to me as if they've also made some changes to the wards within Frome Parish, Frome Town Council. And I think they've done the same with Bridgewater and some other places. So I was just wondering, I didn't realise that that was the scope of this boundary review. I didn't realise that they were going to be changing wards within some of the town councils or the larger parishes. Have I misunderstood? Could you clarify, please? Thank you.
Pointing his microphone down, eager to respond.
Oh, very eager, Chair. The Commission can make pretty much any recommendations that it wishes. The polling districts will have to change because they have altered the boundaries. So we will have to carry out a review of polling districts and polling places to match their final decision, whatever that happens to be. Yes, they can recommend changes to parish, town council warding arrangements, which is what they've done, and it's very common that they do. Certainly in Frome, they did it in 2012, completely changed the warding by introducing 2 new small wards. And I think the current recommendations for Frome are that they do away with one of those wards they recommended in the past and have a different ward, which I think is called Hill something. I've forgotten off the top of my head. So yes, they can do all of those things.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any other member? Tim, you're.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to endorse and agree with pretty much everything that's been said. I mean, we've done the top-down part of this puzzle. It's now time for the bottom-up input. I think the parishes have to do it. So yeah, I'm really happy to support the approach. Thank you, Chair.
Any other? Dawn Johnson and Emily Pills.
I think I'm happy to move this to a vote. I think, there seems to be quite clear support for this to go ahead as it stands, that we have made all our representations up to date, and that anyone else that still wants to represent can do so via their parish councils or their town councils or any other way that they might want to respond.
Before we move that, I'd like to point out as well that having been involved in this process several times with districts and county councils, this isn't a rubber stamping exercise. Every single time between this stage and the final stage, there has been some changes implemented where they said Councillor X or X parish councillor suggested that, and on balance, we've decided to change our original proposal. So what we're looking at now, what I think will broadly look like what it's looked like, but it won't be exactly. There will be some 1 or 2 changes there, undoubtedly will happen. Emily Pearlstone.
Thank you. I'm quite happy to second the proposal of moving on and allowing, bottom tier, lower tier, if you like, to look at it for themselves. And I would also like to reiterate how grateful this committee and this council, if I may speak on behalf of, to Stephen and Jonathan, for the huge amount of work that they've gone through, and probably some head scratching, slightly sleepless, fretful nights in trying to accommodate many different areas of contention. So thank you both of you very, very much.
As well, because they've worked enormously hard on this agenda. Sue Osborne.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, as you say, I support everything that's been said so far, particularly thanks to the officers for the work you've done. You must be mighty relieved that we are now going to leave it to everyone else to put their consultations rather than ask you to do yet another one. As you rightly say, it would probably be, as Stephen rightly says, we would be on a hiding to nothing. So let's see. It's also important that if people are happy with what's been done, that they also tell the Boundary Commission that they are happy, because if neighbours are less than happy, you may find you get changes you don't want. It was really a quick question for Stephen about warding, because this is something that's going to be new for quite a few of us. I think there's something like 29 towns that are now going to face warding. It's just clarification based on something you said earlier, that the Boundary Commission recommends the warding. We're going to review polling districts, and I seem to recall that that was a decision we made a few months ago when that agenda item came up. Let's do it once we know what the boundaries are and we know what we're dealing with. So could you have a situation where, say, a town council area or parish council area is split in two, so it forms two divisions, that you wouldn't have to ward it. It could still carry on as one unit. It wouldn't necessarily need to have to ward in that sense.
Thank you, Chair. No, you can't. Electoral divisions will immediately give you warding within the area.
Any other? We've got Martin Well.
Just to say, really, looking at this process, and we all have at great depth, it's always been the recommendation and obviously the wish of the Boundary Commission to have single member wards. And we tried very hard to push through some double, and there was even suggestion on treble ones from certain parts of the area. But then it's come back now with this 96 or single member wards. And I think we as a council have to accept that now, which we're going to do by your recommendation, Chairman, and move on. And any of the people who still want to argue about their double membership ward will have to do so on their own. So the only thing I would say for my own area, because you can only judge your own areas really well, is I found the changes they put into the boundaries eminently sensible, and they should have been done years ago. We're going along a main road and etc., instead of wandering around through fields and through bits and pieces as they have been. So I was very pleased with that bit, and thank you.
Yeah, and I think you're right. The comments are well made, particularly regarding the single member division. We pushed that envelope, didn't we? We had a go, and we thought it was the right thing to do. I think in principle, I believe that we can see that, you know, what we were saying was eminently sensible, but the boundary commissioners ain't playing along on that one. So let's not beat ourselves over the head on something. Let's try and win those battles which are winnable, and not waste our time on lost causes. The last item on the agenda is the Constitution and Governance Committee work programme. I know we've got Helen Kay wants to raise some issues regarding the Light Touch Planning Committee working reviews. Helen.
Hello, thank you. Unless I've only quickly glanced at this, unless I've not seen, I'm not sure, but I don't think that it's on there for the planning terms of reference review in the autumn. So having pushed for this terms of reference review, I see that the working group met. They had another paper given them which gave more details about what was going to be in the planning and infrastructure bill, and they took it upon themselves to decide not to do a review. And I think this is a bit odd because okay, thank you. Because it's coming from the Constitution and Governance Committee here, as I understand it, is the committee that decides whether or not a review needs to be made. And we spent a lot of time at the May meeting, probably an hour or so, deciding that we did think that we were going to try and do something in June in order to take some recommendations to the July meeting. And I didn't realise it was within the gift of a working group to then decide, well, no, we've changed our minds. We're not, you know, we don't think we're going to do it. I'd also like to just make a general point about democracy. because as a member of a minority party, and I'm a backbencher, I have no position of power. Sorry to be political, but the Lib Dem administration has decided not to use a cabinet system, so we don't really get a say except in the committees that we're in. This is where we have some power in these committees, and on the planning committee. That's the other main committee that I'm on. And otherwise, we don't really have a say unless we put forward full council motions. And I felt that by this working party deciding not to do this review, that felt like it was undermining this committee and the democratic mandate of this committee. So I'm just a bit concerned that, you know, we had spent quite a lot of time deciding to do it, and then it was decided not to. Now, I've looked at the note that was sent out by the planning officer, the head of planning, about the planning and infrastructure bill, and I don't think it impinges on the things that we might have asked the working group to look at. And I think that was the mistake we made. We didn't give a sufficient steer from this committee to the working group for the things we wanted them to look at. And I did mention a few off the top of my head. I said, for example, only having 2 days to look at the decision about whether or not you want something to be referred up to committee. And the fact that when the last review was done, we're allowed to have subs from outside the area. I'm not really happy about that, particularly the chair of strategic planning that can drop into any of the 4 old district meetings as a sub. And when there was a consultation on that last year, of the 33 councillors that bothered to reply, 32 of them said they didn't think that was a good idea, but it went through anyway. So there are things like that that could have been done that do not cross over with the work that is coming, the likely changes that are coming from the planning and infrastructure bill. They're things that are particular to our constitution, which may stay particular to our constitution, regardless of what the planning and infrastructure bill says in future. And they're the sort of things that we could have looked at in this review. And I just want, then the last point was that was made several times, was that whenever they may announce that they're going to make these changes in the autumn, but quite often they don't actually come into effect for another year or so. So we're going to continue, it seems to me, with this current constitution that a lot of us aren't happy with, unless at some point we put this on our forward programme. I've read the note that came out afterwards. It was just a shame that I was on holiday, and it says that a review of the current planning terms of reference may still be needed, and the working group suggested this should be reviewed in the autumn when more should be known. So it needs to be on that forward plan. Thank you for listening to my long speech.
That's fine. Scott, hopefully you'll be able to clarify some of the points that Helen's been making and I'll come provide some answers.
Certainly, Chair, and again, hopefully just for reassurance, it was certainly the agreement of the working group that in the light of the planned government legislative changes, that undertaking a light touch review should be deferred, and therefore all councillors were advised of the working group's point. And there is a nuance here, which is all the working group has agreed is effectively to defer that work. It's a timing point. It's not said it will not do it. It will do it, but it's agreed that in terms of timing, it is better to wait until the government's proposals are much more firm and finalised to better understand their implications on local planning authority decision making, which, as we know from the consultation proposals, are fairly significant in terms of how planning committees could operate in the future. So that was one of the key points of clarification. And again, just the final bit of reassurance, the planning committee terms of reference is on the committee's work programme. If you look, it's under, I think it's under the December entry. So just for reassurance, that is certainly the expectation, to aim to bring those back here.
Clarity of that, Scott. Sue Osborne.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to say, I had, I think, a selection of dates in my diary as hold for that particular planning meeting. I never actually got the invitation, which was why I wasn't there. So I didn't see the paperwork. I didn't get the invitation. I think I did have feedback from my colleagues as to the decision taken, which at the time seems fair enough. The government has launched its consultation on its proposals, its national scheme of delegation, and that we've all been invited to make our own individual contribution. It could be debated that maybe as a Constitution and Governance Working Party, that members should have also made their contribution rather than just leaving it to officers. I think some of this is also stemming from that planning seems to be feeling more and more dictatorial, as though members are being pushed out increasingly. Certainly one of the things is that you sometimes feel parish councils have got more power to get anything to committee than an ordinary member. We've got a mere 48 hours to turn around any reference that comes to us. In order for you to have received that, you also should have called it in the first place within the first 28 days. But, you know, when you look at initial paperwork, there may not quite be enough there. People might be initially happy, but as we know, as the process evolves and concerns come up, you may find that you need to call in at a later date. And previously in Area South, we could do that. In fact, we didn't call in until we actually saw an officer report with, are you happy with the officer report? If you weren't, the only thing you could do was call it in. And you needed to have good planning reasons. And at least when you see an officer report, you've got planning reasons to go on. It can be a bit difficult to pull them out from a whole pile of technical papers. As an aside area at South Somerset, we actually made a conscious decision to leave household applications to officers. It would have to be special circumstances for them to come to us. So in terms of the light touch and our own processes, we could still make a decision to say, okay, revise the terms of reference that members have the right to call in at any time. And it may well be that we do that to ride shotgun to a parish council that wants a bit of extra support. We can also say, actually, members, instead of just having 48 hours, because suppose you were away or your email crashed and decided it was going to throw a wob, so you didn't see it, you were maybe away. So you probably need a bit longer, like maybe 4 days instead of 48, because there could be times when they're still waiting for other bits to come back. You know, we're not the problem in the system. There are problems that lie elsewhere, and it does feel as though we sometimes get the flak. So those are two things you could alter without needing a full-on review. But I would like to know why I was sort of invited to something and then not, basically, because I didn't get that paperwork. I'd still like to be on the working group, and I think you need to make your terms of reference report clear, because at the moment it's officer-led, but I think we need to know between now and December how this working group is going to be reconvened, and that actually what comes out, yes, officers need a say from the technical and legal side, if nothing else, but ultimately it should be member driven. At the end of the day, it is officers that advise and members that decide.
And I think Scott gave some very ample sort of words there which helped the situation and answered a number of questions. And you are on that working group. You were certainly on there because I checked the names with Claire Render before, and you were most definitely on the list. Now, in terms of, you make some really interesting points, and I have more than worthy discussion, but I'm a little bit concerned that we are drifting into a discussion about issues which should be raised and aired when the working party is reconvened. I do note that yourself and others have said that it's quite right and it's the right decision to reconvene whilst we wait and see the full results of the government's consultation of the planning review, which will surely drive forward in terms of our responses to that and where we are going, because then that, again, like we asked last item, it ensures we don't waste time on things which are set in stone and allow us to focus on issues which possibly are up for discussion. So I think a lot of those issues should be aired to the appropriate place, which is the working party when it is reconvened later this year. But you are definitely on that group, as I checked. Richard Wilkins.
Could I just have a bit of a point of clarity from Scott? It's my understanding that the government has made a decision to only endorse cabinet style governance at local level. Is that correct? And therefore, the committee method will no longer be an option for councils.
I think Councillor Wilkins is right to highlight that the government is consulting upon, so it's not yet taken a decision, it's consulting on its proposals to effectively limit local councils to operating leader and cabinet models of governance and to remove the ability of choice where councils can choose between operating what's known as a full committee system or a leader and cabinet model of governance. Again, just to clarify, we operate a leader and cabinet, but clearly we also have committees. So sometimes there is some confusion because that model's called leader and cabinet. People shouldn't think, does that mean you've only got a leader and cabinet? No, it means you've got a leader and cabinet and a series of committees, whereas a committee system is just committees and has no cabinet model. But the government has certainly published proposals of its intentions to bring forward legislative change to remove the option of councils being able to choose. And again, just to give some, I suppose, some local reference, certainly the closest council that I'm aware of would be Bristol City Council, which still operates a committee system. So there are some councils, not many, that operate committee systems. The only other thing I was, well, just while speaking, just to highlight, I know the note that went out after the planning working group, just to highlight in terms of that work being put on temporary hold pending that government legislation. It's also, that very same note also included for all councillors the link to the government's consultation in terms of its legislative change on planning provisions, and more importantly, also encouraged all councillors to take up the opportunity to respond to that consultation. And again, only while speaking, that consultation close date is the 23rd of July. So again, if I could just use to remind everyone, and I know quite a number of members are clearly very interested in our planning committees and the value of those planning committees, then as officers, we would certainly encourage members to take up that opportunity and respond to that government consultation.
Sue, do you want to come back? Because I really don't want us to rehearse the issues that we're going to discuss the working party.
Yeah, I'm quite happy to learn that I'm still on it. I'm quite happy to learn that we are going to reconvene. What I was going to ask is, Scott, as that closing date is so close, the 23rd, is whether it is worth putting a note round to all members to remind them that this closing date is coming up for this consultation with a link. And if you want to speak now or forever hold your peace.
Right. Any other comments then on this one? Helen, you want to come back?
Yes, thank you. A couple of things. I don't think it is a constitutional issue, and I will look at our constitution and I will look to see what are the general terms of reference for working groups. But as I understand it, the point I made earlier is that a working group is subservient to the committee that asks it to go ahead and do something. And as far as I can see, they've just had exactly the same discussion at the working party that we had here in May. So we already knew in May that there was going to be the planning infrastructure bill coming forward. We already knew the bones of it. I don't think the working group had that much more detail than we already had. And they probably rehearsed all the same arguments. So it's as if we've had a wasted time in May and that they've wasted time and officer time convening the meeting as well. And I don't think that constitutionally that a working group can just turn around and go, well, we're not going to do it anyway, particularly if that working group has on it, sitting on it, people in position of power, like the chairs and vice chairs of the committee, that the working group that made the decision last time to change things. They probably have a vested interest in keeping things the same. That's why I say we made a mistake, because we didn't give them a pointer to the things we'd like them to look at. For example, the thing that Sue just talked about then on the 2-day thing. So again, I need some clarity around setting up working groups and what that actually means. you know, do they do what we ask them to do or don't they? Thank you.
They are going to convene. The work has not been binned. They are not going to sit. They're not refusing to do this review. They've just taken a pragmatic decision to put into abeyance until the results of the government consultation have been published, and then that gives them sensibly the parameters about which of the right issues to discuss and which of the issues are pointless to do. So this work will continue to take place. I hear what you're saying, that there are numbers of people on this committee who are chairs and vice chairs of the planning committee. I couldn't possibly comment on about whether they are vested interested or not, but of course, I have to say, we would have had the opportunity to have had more members of the committee who are non-chairs or vice chairs, but this committee passed a motion to reduce the number of non-chairs and vice chairs on that committee, and that's true. That's where we are with that. And I thought that was unfortunate at the time, but that's the decision the committee take. We had an opportunity to have more members of this committee who are not chairs and vice chairs on that working party. Now, whether they would have discussed and disagreed with the rest of the committee, the working party, I don't know, but that work is not been binned. It's going to happen. We have set up this working group, and I fully support the fact that they are going to wait a little while, not long, until we have the full results of the government consultation, which will guide them in terms of the best issues to discuss when they set up the working group. And I think it would be a better piece of work for doing so, rather than rushing ahead now and perhaps making some incomplete conclusions, which may have been made irrelevant as a result of the government proposed legislation.
Okay, well, thank you for that, for responding. I have to beg to differ that they could have been different areas that we focused on, but anyway, thank you very much.
Could I just move on to the very last item on the agenda, which is to be scheduled, local councillor protocol. Could you tell me what that is?
Just deal with this first.
I rather hoped we had, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I've got Sue's raised that. Sue, is there anything else you wish to add to this discussion, which has not already been raised before?
There is nothing further to add on the planning terms recommendation. I think we're all very clear on where we're going with that now. What I was going to ask was, we also have the smoke come out the chimney on the local government boundary review, the final one. At that point, at the 4th of December, at that point, when those final recommendations come out, is that it? So if people are still unhappy, do they have a final bite of the cherry? Because I see.
Do not.
We don't.
They don't. That's once they've made the final recommendation. The only barrier towards implementation is an order set in Parliament, which is basically a rubber stamping exercise. The opportunity for members and any other person, Uncle Tom Cobley and their friends and everybody, or any other group or member who wishes to contribute to this process in a positive way, is get your comments in to the commissioners for August the 11th. This is your one and only chance to influence this process for the last time.
Yeah, I was merely sort of recalling on the parliamentary boundary commission change for Parliament that they did put in sort of a final or second draft, and we actually did manage to succeed in getting Bruton away from Frome and putting it back where it belonged in Glastonbury and Somerton. I do remember that case and argument being made, and having that opportunity. I didn't know if this operated the same way, but you've made it very clear now. Thank you, Chair.
Right, the same way, because the point you're talking about now is the point we're at, and there will be opportunities to change things, and some things will change. So if we can move on from that item, then Stephen, you want to?
Sorry, it was the very last thing, Mr. Chairman. Teller local councillor protocol. What is it?
If you're happy, Chair, for me to respond. So, unfortunately, slight typo. It should be tell local councillor, TLC. That is Appendix 5 of the Council's Constitution. It's a specific protocol that's designed effectively to remind and ensure that officers of the council continue to update local councillors on matters of concern, particularly where there may be service changes and the like. So the fact that it's on this programme is again just part of
that's really good. So it's tell a local councillor, yes, not teller,
yes.
Which is either terribly American, or it means that we're not allowed to stand outside polling stations. Okay, thank you for that explanation. That really helps. Thank you.
Can I treat this then as the formal end of this meeting, and thank you all very much for coming. Thank you.